Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dan Hanford. This podcast is unlike any other podcast you have been listening to. The guests on this show are true, active real estate investors closing real multifamily deals. Whether you are an active investor looking to up your game or a passive investor looking to learn more about how multifamily deals are structured, I promise you will thoroughly enjoy this podcast. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified of future episodes. For those of you that are interested in investing passively in these types of deals, in solid, cash-flowing multifamily deals throughout the Southeast, then visit my group, PassiveInvesting.com. Fill out the investor interest form. That's PassiveInvesting.com. If you've closed a multifamily deal in the past 12 months and want to be on this podcast, then send an email to Stacy@multifamilyinvestornation.com for details. Now let's get started.
Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins Hutton, the Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And with us today, we have Rachael Jones. Rachael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm happy to be here.
Before we dive into the details of your deal, Columbia North, 29 units in Columbia, South Carolina, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into multifamily and where you're at today.
I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. My background is engineering. I come from the energy industry. And back in 2016, I started getting into single families as a side hustle. And then a couple of years ago, I'd been buying property a year and I ended up buying a 6 unit. Thought, hey, this is a great way to earn some extra income and could be a full-time thing. And that's what I've been working towards the past couple of years. And just this year, I went full-time real estate investor.
Are you a passive investor looking to diversify your portfolio? The team at PassiveInvesting.com is thrilled to introduce the investment opportunity of our real estate debt fund. This debt fund places first position loans on rehab projects sourced by our private lending company called Rehab Wallet. Since we started this debt fund in June of 2020, we have funded over $260 million in loans to borrowers across the United States. As a limited partner investing alongside PassiveInvesting.com, you can be part of the success of Rehab Wallet. With a minimum investment of $25,000, you can seize the opportunity to earn a preferred return of 6 to 8% with a 90-day liquidity option to call your capital back. Our real estate fund has been a great investment for our investors to have a short-term or rainy-day cash reserve with a high-yield return option. Don't miss out on this chance to enhance your portfolio and your financial future. Visit PassiveInvesting.com to discover more about this real estate debt fund and start your journey towards a prosperous investment today. That's PassiveInvesting.com.
I can totally identify with that journey myself, having scaled over 36 units, single family and flips and all that sort of stuff. So I can appreciate that transition, that scaling piece too. Well, let's dive into Columbia North, 29 units, South Carolina. When did you close on the deal and what was the purchase price?
So we closed in mid-June 15th. It was a long negotiation, but we ended up closing for $1.675 million.
Long negotiation. Let's back the train up a little bit then, the timeline. When did you first learn about this deal? Was it on market, off market, with a broker? How did that all happen?
I learned about it through a broker. It was on market. It had actually, we were the third contract that they'd gone under contract with, and we learned about it back in January. We really started negotiating on this in early February.
Third contract, what had been going on?
There's quite a few things on this one. A lot of distress. The seller had owned it for quite a long time. They hadn't put any CapEx money into it for also a very long time, and had actually been losing money for the past 2 years. That makes it not particularly great in terms of trying to sell it, especially in the current market. It was pretty distressed asset that we were looking to pick up.
Distressed asset, like what class was it? Like vintage? Was it like a class B, class C?
It's a class C, maybe for the area, but it was in a class C plus, class B minus neighborhood. And it was up 2 blocks from where the city had been recently expanding North Main Street. So they'd recently doubled the width of the street, added bike lanes, sidewalks, right down from a park. It's 5 minutes from a hospital, the main hospital for Columbia, and it's 10 minutes from downtown Columbia. So we really got the sense that it was in a neighborhood that was turning over. And the ownership had just not really recognized that the neighborhood had changed since they took ownership 10 years before. And so we thought it was a great opportunity to come in, invest some money in the neighborhood, and really get better quality tenants in place pretty quickly to get our returns back up. Because we just thought, hey, I think we can manage this better. I think we can do a much better job owning this property.
Half the progress. I love it. You're the third group to put it under contract. What was it listed for? And then how did you go for it?
2.1 million is what it was listed for.
2.1 million. Obviously, that's not what you closed at. You've already informed us what you guys closed at. How did you structure the contract?
I have a lot of terms in my contract that I've gone through with my lawyer. They've done a lot more deals than I have. It's really helpful to have their experience when setting the contract up rather than going with a standard contract. So we had terms in there where if we found something really large, larger than $100,000, that we would get all of our hard money back, regardless of when we found it. That turned out we didn't have to use that, but it turned out to be a great lever. We had 30 days due diligence. We had 30 days after that to close, and we had 30 days extension on top of that in terms of timeline. So we had up to 90 days to close. Most of the time, and I do this a lot, is I put in an early access clause into my LOIs. Even before I'm under contract, if the LOI gets signed, I'm investing initial money into it. I'm sending the property inspector out there. I'm getting boots on the ground to get a much better feel for it. With that early access clause, it really saves me time. You do have to put some money up front without having the contract. So it's a little bit of risk, but it helps you go a little bit faster through the process and really know where you're at before the contract even gets signed.
And so how much hard money did you put down initially? And then was there additional hard money due if you executed the extension?
Yeah, so we put down $30,000 earnest money. We didn't have to put down anything hard to get it under contract. Like I said, it was a distressed property. There weren't really any other bidders, which is helpful when you're trying to go in and negotiate with the seller because you really have all the leverage. And then, if we wanted to do an extension, was going to be another $5,000 on top of that for another 30 days. So I typically set that number pretty low in the contract initially and let the seller come back to me if they want something larger for an extension, because some sellers honestly don't really care. They know that things most people right now are using the extension. So a lot of the sellers are like, yeah, the number doesn't really matter, but it takes some risk and some stress off of me as the buyer if I can keep that number pretty low.
30,000, with the signing of the purchase and sale agreement. How much early access did you get to the property to begin your due diligence?
I had access to all the vacant units and exterior before going under contract. So we didn't disturb any of the tenants, but we could go in and go into the vacant units. I can send my inspector out to walk the property, find hopefully anything that's really big. And then that way, when we're going into the contract period, we're going in with as much information as we can possibly have. Some sellers won't let you do that. They want to be under contract first. But in this case, it was fine. They'd already been sending people out quite a bit. Other two contracts that they gone under, and the tenants were everybody was kind of used to, hey, this is what's happening right now.
So did you have like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks early access between?
Yeah, we ended up having, I think it ended up being about 2 weeks early access. It doesn't specify in the LOI. So I signed in the LOI, it just says I can go in as soon as the LOI is signed. Then it just depends on how long it takes to negotiate the PSA to get signed in terms of how long that early access lasts.
So that's kind of a neat little clause to add to your LOI because it really extends your due diligence period. I like that. Of the people that I've been interviewing on the show that has mentioned they actually do that. I mean, I know a lot of people walk a majority of the units beforehand, but to really get your team in, your contractors in, your property management in to really start doing a thorough inspection of the units, that's amazing. That could buy you at least another 2 or 3 weeks on your due diligence period.
It can also save you, if the seller's asking for hard money as soon as the PSA is signed, it can save you that money if you find something big beforehand that you would have backed out of before. So that's why, for me, it's worth that paying a little bit for my team to go in early so I can knock down those bigger risks before going under contract if the seller's amenable to it.
I love that. Yeah, that was the second thought that I was about to mention there. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I absolutely love that. Deal gets accepted, 30,000 down. Now you're under contract. You've got that 30-day due diligence. You've already had early access and have gotten your contractors in. Tell us about the physical due diligence. How'd that go?
We found the units in pretty much the shape we expected. The units themselves weren't that big of a deal, but there were two things that we ended up making this a little bit more hairy and are some of the reasons that this did get extended. Like I said, we had 90 days in the contract. We signed the contract in mid-February, but we didn't close until mid-June. And that's definitely more than 90 days. So the couple things that ended up happening, the first one was during that initial inspection, before we even closed the contract, we found aluminum wiring that was not reported as part of the marketing package. The owner didn't even know about it. I don't think the property manager actually even knew it was there. When we found that, we knew, hey, we're going to have insurance problems. And that was one of the things that really helped, or that really extended it. We had to go through a pretty long list of insurance companies in order to find one that would quote us. And it ended up being the company that was insuring the property at the time, because they knew, hey, we haven't had any loss runs. They haven't had any of this. So even though there was no history of any kind of issues, just mere mention of unmitigated aluminum wiring was enough to send insurance companies kind of scurrying for the hills in the current environment.
Riddle me this. It had already been under contract twice. And if those groups had inspected it, wouldn't the seller have been informed?
I don't know the answer to that. I would hope so. I would hope so. But it was not told to us. But when we found it, we knew immediately we were going to have to get a reduction in the purchase price so we could go in and mitigate it after closing, as well as we were going to have to make sure we had solid insurance in place before going out of due diligence period.
And so for the insurance due diligence, you went to the current company, which I think is another brilliant move. If you're having trouble getting insurance, figure out who's the seller currently using and seeing if they'll just continue coverage. Obviously, it's a new policy, but now they're making you mitigate it, or was that just something you chose to do?
They required us to mitigate it within the first year. Now, there's not, they didn't put like bounds around that exactly, but we're required at the end of the year to present them with, hey, we had a licensed electrician. They verify that this has been mitigated. Now, aluminum wiring mitigation can take a couple different forms. One is you completely rewire the property. Like you replace every single wire with copper and everything's up to new code and it's perfect. And that's, if you're going to hold it for a very, very long time, that may make sense. But financially speaking, that's a tough move to make because it requires you opening up walls. You've got a lot of finishing work that has to go in. And just the sheer price of that volume of copper is huge. We got quotes for the seller. We got quotes for that rewiring, as well as we got quotes for what's called a Lumicon. It's more like a pigtailing. So they make these little connections where you plug the aluminum wiring in one side and you attach the outlet to the other side. And now it's mitigated, because the problem with aluminum is it corrodes over time. So the aluminum and the fixtures, if they're not, the materials themselves actually don't like each other. So it eats away at the aluminum. And over time that can cause fire hazard comes from. Once we got those two quotes, we went to the seller and we presented him with the full rewiring quote, because he said, look, we don't know which one we're going to have to do. And from our perspective, that's a safer bet. That's a more conservative estimate. But we gave him a contractor quoting, hey, this is how much it's going to cost us to do that. And so that was part of the negotiation to get the price down. It's a big part of it to say, hey, look, these are the findings we found, but this is by far the biggest one. And that's going to impact anybody that ever looks at this property. Like you're just not going to be able to, unless you're going to go through and mitigate it yourself, you're just not going to be able to sell it without this discount.
Were there any other surprises on physical due diligence?
Yeah, we ended up having to do a phase 2 environmental assessment. For those not familiar, there's typically you have to do a phase 1 assessment anytime you get a bank loan. They go through, they assess the property for environmental hazards. They typically just do this from a computer. You're just looking at, hey, is there anything in the area that would cause us to have an environmental concern in the groundwater or in the land itself or in the air? And it depends on your area, but sometimes they find something and they say, hey, actually, in our case, there's a laundromat up the hill that's been there since the 1950s. And it's just like it was half a mile inside of the radius that they were looking at. If it had been another half mile further away, we wouldn't have had to do a phase 2. But it was close enough. We had the bank triggered a phase 2, which is about 2 times more expensive than a phase 1. So you're paying for the phase 1, and then you're also now paying for the phase 2 on top of that. And to do the phase 2, they actually go in and measure. They measure all of the contaminants. So they go in and they take vapor samples, they get soil samples, and they send those to a lab to see what will actually measure if your property is actually contaminated or not.
Wow. Okay. And how did the phase 2 come out?
It came out clear. So we just had to go through that, but it took extra time. So that was part of why we were able to get it additionally extended, even though we didn't pay for the extension, was because between the aluminum wiring thing going on and then the phase 2 now getting required, which we found that out close to the end of due diligence. We were like, look, if we're going to close on this, there's a lot of stuff going on. And we're one of the few buyers willing to go after a project like this and not just say, oh, that's too much for us, we're out. They were willing to kind of let us just do our thing, do what we needed to do in order to verify and keep the stay under contract without having to risk our earnest money yet.
Are you a serious real estate investor looking to break into the multifamily space? Or are you an experienced multifamily investor looking to level up your game by meeting new passive investors and creating new partnerships? Have you heard of the MFI Con happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, June 12th through the 14th? The Multifamily Investor Nation Convention is a place to learn from over 60 plus high-level speakers and also to network with over 700 serious multifamily investors. If that's not enough for you, A-Rod. Yes, Alex Rodriguez, 12-time Major League Baseball All-Star with over $700 million of commercial real estate, including apartments, will be live and in person speaking at this event. Also speaking is the one and only Dr. Robert Cialdini, the godfather of influence and the award-winning author of the book Influence, one of my all-time favorite business books. Finally, we will have the CEO of Taco Bell, Mark King, joining us on stage to talk about leadership. Be sure to secure your tickets to this live in-person event as the tickets are going fast. Go to mfincon.com to find out more details. There are also sponsorship opportunities available for those of you who would like to have a booth at this event. For the details for this event and to purchase tickets, visit mfincon.com. You can use promo code MFINPodcast, all one word, MFIN Podcast, to get $200 off tickets, and that's mfincon.com. Look forward to seeing you there.
You already mentioned at the top of the show that this property had been losing money for the past couple of years. So I'm curious about the lending piece. Can you walk us through that? What kind of loan did you get? Let's talk about the structure of the loan, but also like what kind of lending did you get on a property that is not currently making money?
So that's always exciting, right? Banks do not like it to lend to things that don't make money. This one is small enough that we ended up going with a local bank that has been very helpful. Like we ended up getting a loan to cost loan. And so we rolled in not only the purchase price, but also the CapEx that would be required to get this property up to performing into the loan. And that's been really helpful because it's all fixed rate. On top of having 3 years interest only, we have fixed rate both on the loan and on the CapEx side, but we don't pay interest on the CapEx until we draw on it. It's almost like a line of credit, the way it's set up. And that's really helpful when you've got like a year's worth of work to do. And so you don't have to pay interest on that whole amount that entire time. You can just draw on it as you need it. And then after you're done with it, after you get to the end, then it kind of resets and you've got the whole loan sitting there at a fixed rate for the next, I think it's a 5-year loan right now.
That's awesome. Okay. And then what kind of rate did you get?
We got a 6.75% interest rate.
Okay.
I was pretty happy with it, to be honest, at that given time. It is a recourse loan. Small banks typically do require it to be recourse versus like a Fannie Freddie, which would be non-recourse. So it is a little bit more risk on my side. In this case, I think it was definitely worth it. The bank's been a very good partner to us, and we've been really happy working with them so far.
Are there any prepayment penalties or lockout periods for you to be able to refinance? Should
Nope.
rates fall or get a more permanent loan?
No prepayment penalties, no fallout period, nothing. I could refinance tomorrow if I really wanted to, but I definitely don't.
Not right now. Not in this interest rate environment. We talked before the show, you didn't raise capital on this deal, but you did take this down with some partners. So tell us about how you structured the JV, the joint venture. How many partners are there? What are the share ownership of the entity that owns the property? And then, what did they bring to the table monetarily, but also like ongoing responsibilities?
This one is actually, I was able to find just one other partner to partner with me on that could bring the capital. I found the deal, I sourced it, I did all of the due diligence work, all the management, and I'm at heart an asset manager. So I don't want to give that up. This person was really just looking more for passive income. And so it worked out really well that they could bring the capital and then I could do the work. And you kind of hear, it's like, okay, this is a great marriage. I did bring in some of the capital, about 10% of it. But they brought in the large majority of that. And then we ended up splitting it 50-50 in terms of equity stake.
And then what was their vision on this? And I guess the overarching business plan, is it to rehab, get it up to market rents, and then just stabilize the property? But what is your overarching business plan?
Yeah. So we went into this thinking, all right, we're going to essentially flip it. We're going to fix it up. We'll hold it, stabilize it. It's a lot of work. So it's going to take about 3 years to get it fully stabilized. And then we'll start looking to sell. Right now, we're maybe adjusting that because we're actually getting more and more bullish on this property. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll look to refinance instead of sell in about 3 years. Depends on where everything ends up landing. Depends on interest rates. Depends on a lot of things. But yeah, ultimately, the goal is to, hey, we're putting about $500,000 into the property, and then we're going to fix it up, get a better tenant base in there, everybody paying rent, vacancy is low, get the property really looking nice and performing really well, and then see where we're at essentially, and either look to sell it or look to refinance it.
How did you find this partner?
Just personal connections. I mean, like I said, I'm from engineering background, and so I have a network there, and I just kind of reached out. I've been talking to people. I do raise capital for other deals. I've done another couple other syndications, and I'm continuing to do those. So it's one of those things where as the bigger your network gets, you start learning who would be interested in this kind of partnership versus who's more interested in a different kind. Like everybody's looking for a little bit different return, a little bit different timeline, a little bit different risk level. You can kind of help tailor who you're talking to based on the property you find.
This question, you just recently took over the property. Were there any surprises after takeover?
I'm not sure surprise necessarily. One thing we did find is it does have a laundry room in it. And we knew that going in, that the laundry room had actually been backed up. The sewer there had backed up about 2 years ago, and they just shut the doors and left it. That gives you kind of a sense of how it was being managed before. We knew that had happened going in, like we did that as part of due diligence. But what we didn't really realize is that there was a sewer drain in that laundry room that we didn't inspect that particular drain. And so it actually wasn't draining. So we went to pressure wash the laundry room to start cleaning it up. And then the water just kind of sat there. The contractor had to go in, and luckily the pipes were fine. So they just had to snake it and clear it out, and it worked fine. But it had just been backed up for so long that everything had just kind of dried in place. Yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise.
Surprise! As we wrap up, I got a couple more questions for you. What did you find easy that you thought was going to be more challenging through this process? And then what ended up being harder than you expected that you thought was going to be easy?
On the easier side, I think what I wasn't expecting was the bank side of things. In the current environment, I was expecting to have a much tougher time finding financing, but I reached out to a couple of local banks, and I was pretty quickly able to get a couple of different options on loans. And then I just got to pick the best one. And that was a bit surprising to me because I was pretty sure I was going to have trouble getting that at the time. I think part of that's relationships. I've been talking to these bankers, I've been quoting them on a number of other things for a while, different LOIs, things that fell through. So we had conversation and working relationship before going under contract on this. And so it made it easier when I was like, hey, I'm really serious. They take me seriously when I'm like, hey, I'm looking at this. I really want to buy it. They know, oh yeah, we have her information. We know the background and finances. We just need a couple of details and we can just roll with it. So that's definitely helps. On the harder side, I'd say the insurance was definitely one I was not expecting. I went into it not knowing the aluminum wiring piece. I had gotten insurance quotes before getting under even LOI because back in early this year, even getting insurance quotes was really difficult. And that was when insurance was really starting to spike and everybody was really starting to freak out about prices going up and up and up. I'd already gotten some quotes even before putting my LOI in, and then finding out I was going to have to go back and get more insurance quotes from those same people, as well as how long it took them. The underwriting for insurance took a couple of weeks. It took a long time just to get those quotes back. And that was surprising to me and unexpected.
Rachael, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight with us here today. If people want to find out more about you, how can they do so?
You can find me at clovercapitalgroup.net. I'm available there, or at Rachael@clovercapitalgroup.net. I'm also on LinkedIn quite a lot. I'm sure you'll post a link somewhere, but that's I post there pretty regularly, especially when Yono Vice is having one of his LinkedIn challenges on there. I always do those.
Oh, who? The LinkedIn challenges?
Yeah, Yono Vice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We just actually recently had Yona on the Passive Investing Made Simple Masterclass. I've had him multiple times. Love him. Such a great guy.
Yeah, I'll definitely put in a plug for those. Those have helped me a lot.
That's a good little nugget you just dropped there. For those of you who are active operators, Yona, when he does Weiss advice, when he does those challenges, make sure to follow those. Rachael, again, thank you so much for your time here today. I am excited for your project because, it sounds like it's built in the path of progress, and we learn about hearing about future projects that you do.
Fantastic. This was great, Whitney. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I trust you enjoyed this episode. Take a moment right now to leave us a review and let us know what you learned. Also, don't forget to visit passiveinvesting.com and fill out the investor interest form to invest alongside me in excellent multifamily assets located across the Southeast. That's passiveinvesting.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.